generally and settled, but still rather cloudy. A lot of low cloud covering the hills of Wales, Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and bringing mostly grey conditions, but a few brighter spells poking through for North East England, perhaps parts of East Wales, Eastern Scotland and Northern Ireland. It's going to feel cold under the cloud in the south, 3 to 5 Celsius, a bit milder further north, but across northern Scotland we do have some rain, especially for the Northern Isles, where it will also be windy as we end the day. Coastal gales for Shetland. Pushing through some showers overnight, but elsewhere across the UK, most places are dry. Again, a lot of cloud cover, but some breaks in the cloud coming south into northern England, the Midlands and Wales. And where we see some breaks, a touch of frost and a few fog patches are possible, but they'll be fairly localised because for the vast majority it's another cloudy start to the day on Wednesday. And that cloud persisting across southern parts of the country through much of the day, but some holes developing more widely across East Wales, the Midlands, as well as into parts of northern England. Meanwhile, much of northern and western Scotland sees it turn wet and windy by the end of the afternoon, although it will be milder here compared to recent days. And further south, it will also be a touch milder with temperatures returning to around average. Wet and windy weather in the northwest pushes through during Wednesday evening. It sinks south into central and southern Scotland as well as Northern Ireland. But watch out for coastal gales, 50 to 60 mile-per-hour wind gusts for the north of the mainland of Scotland. It's going to stay blustery on Thursday, but a little brighter with further cloud breaks developing.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. We've the latest on Boris Johnson's birthday bash held during that first lockdown as police announced they are now investigating Downing Street events. We'll have Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner's urgent question on this live from the Commons. We're also going to be talking about the other debates that are happening in Parliament this week, health inequalities and Tourette syndrome. But first, it's the news with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 12 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Met Police Chief has confirmed Downing Street parties are being investigated for possible COVID breaches. Dame Cressida Dick says a number of events are being looked at after officers were given information from the Sue Gray inquiry. Well, police have now written to the Cabinet Office, formally requesting it to refer all relevant information on the gatherings. It comes after Downing Street admitted the Prime Minister had a birthday celebration during the first lockdown.
I absolutely understand that there is deep public concern about the allegations that have been in the media over the last several weeks. As a result, firstly, of the information provided by the Cabinet Office inquiry team, and secondly, my officer's own assessment, I can confirm that the Met is now investigating a number of events that took place at Downing Street and Whitehall in the last 2 years in relation to potential breaches of COVID-19 regulations.
Russia is being threatened with an unprecedented package of sanctions if it invades Ukraine. It follows a virtual meeting between the Prime Minister, US President, NATO and other world leaders last night. Moscow has amassed around 100,000 troops on the border with Ukraine, raising tensions and fears of an attack. Well, the former British Army officer, Colonel Bob Stewart, told us this doesn't necessarily mean there'll be an invasion.
It's a normal tactic. It's the sort of same way that bullies always use. They build up their troops and they might or they might not use them. At the moment, there's a huge build-up of what the military call power, so they could invade. Equally, they might be bluffing.
Royal Mail has announced it's cutting 700 management jobs. It says the move will save around £40 million a year. It follows a difficult period over Christmas and the New Year, with staff absences at one point peaking at 15,000 because of COVID. Well, bosses say they'll hold talks with unions over the proposed job losses. Also in business news, Unilever is cutting around 1,500 jobs globally as part of a group-wide overhaul. The consumer goods giant, which makes Dove and Marmite, is planning to axe around 15% of senior management and 5% of junior roles to create 5 business divisions. It says jobs will be lost in the UK and worldwide operations, but they made clear factory teams aren't expected to be impacted. There are new calls for the national insurance hike to be scrapped. The former Brexit chief, Lord Frost, has joined now a growing number of senior Conservatives asking the Prime Minister not to raise the tax in April. With the cost of living set to rise, he told the Daily Mail the £12 billion increase is not necessary or justified. A Conservative peer who quit in what's been described as one of the most dramatic moments ever seen in the House of Lords claims fraud is rampant in the government. Lord Agnew of Alton, who was the Efficiency and Transformation Minister, announced his resignation at the dispatch box yesterday before marching out. He criticised his party's schoolboy errors in the handling of fraudulent COVID business loans. Ground rents are set to be abolished for most new long residential leaseholds in England and Wales. The law will restrict ground rents to a token 1 peppercorn per year. Effectively, they have no financial value. Communities Minister Eddie Hughes says it will make a real difference to thousands of future leaseholders. The University of Oxford is looking for 6,000 patients to trial a new COVID antiviral drug. Officials say it will help alleviate symptoms and hopefully prevent serious illness. Adults over the age of 50 and those with underlying health problems are being urged to come forward. The US President Joe Biden's been caught out on camera swearing at a reporter while his microphone was still switched on. It was after a press conference and journalists were being ushered out when a White House correspondent shouted a question about the impact of inflation on this year's congressional elections. Well, Joe Biden responded without realising his microphone was still active.
Do you think inflation is a political liability?
That's a great asset. More inflation. What a stupid son of a...
This is GB News. I'll keep you up to date across the afternoon. Now to the briefing with Gloria.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, Boris Johnson was treated to an indoor birthday gathering in June 2020, complete with cake and M&S nibbles at a time when indoor mixing was banned. Now the police are investigating. We'll have the latest from Downing Street and the verdict from a Conservative and a Labour MP. The pandemic has been terrible for our health, not just COVID itself, but all the other illnesses that haven't been dealt with. I'm talking with Labour MP Peter Dowd about what can be done. And I'm talking Tourette syndrome with Labour MP Conor McGinn, who had a parliamentary debate this morning and is calling for more support and resources. Yet another party at Downing Street has been reported, this one for the Prime Minister's birthday, with a cake and nibbles. This morning, the Met Police have said they are going to investigate Downing Street and Whitehall parties. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is outside Downing Street for us. Darren, the latest.
Yeah, good afternoon, Gloria. In fact, the Defence Secretary has just left Ben Wallace. Cabinet has been meeting this morning. Lots of questions about their reaction, clearly, to this police investigation. We know for a long time, haven't we, the Metropolitan Police have frankly said that they haven't got the evidence, really, to start an investigation. That has now changed. Caressa Dick, the head of the Met, today suggesting that through the information that's been supplied through the Cabinet Office, that's Sue Gray's investigation, and their own officers' investigations, that they have come up with at least evidence that they think should now be investigated. It is a very significant, and it must be said, on the whole, worrying development for the government. Frankly, the police saying that they've got enough, that they really want to investigate this properly. And we know, of course, that some of the police officers at the gates here in Downing Street, both ends, spoke to Sue Gray's investigation within the last week, with the Telegraph reporting that they provided quite significant information, quite damning information, it was put to the Telegraph. So all in all, you know, we have been here before. Tony Blair, you remember that, Gloria, 10, 15 years ago, was questioned as a witness into this while he was still Prime Minister in Downing Street. Will Boris Johnson potentially be questioned by the police? That is entirely possible. Lots of Conservative MPs this morning not terribly happy about it. The one thing it does, though, provide, which Boris Johnson's been frantically trying to find, frankly, over the last couple of weeks, is time, because now it looks that while the Metropolitan Police is investigating all of this, that Sue Gray's report, while continuing to gather her own information, will not now be published until the Met have concluded their investigation, and that could be weeks, potentially even months. What it means is that report that we're expecting later on this week from Sue Gray is not now definitely going to be published this week. As I say, it could still be quite a long time down the track.
What's the mood amongst Conservative MPs in light of today's news?
Well, I think largely, you know, this is not great news for the Prime Minister. It is never good that essentially events in Downing Street and elsewhere in Whitehall are now being investigated by the police. That is incredibly serious. As I say, it alludes to the fact that they feel that there is enough evidence that they can properly investigate it, and that is weighing heavily on the minds of Conservative MPs. Some of them, of course, have already submitted letters on what we know in the public domain, that the Prime Minister should resign. Many more were pretty frustrated and pretty angry last night at new revelations that there was somewhat of a birthday party for the Prime Minister back in June 2020, when lots were told not to mix indoors. Downing Street alluding to the fact that this event had taken place. Cabinet ministers this morning struggling to say that it was not within the guidance, or trying to defend all of that. But in the end, I suspect most Conservatives probably, Gloria, will hold out for that police investigation, for Sue Gray's investigation. But what that means, again, is just weeks and months of this dragging on, which in the end could do not just the Prime Minister, but indeed the entire government and the Conservative Party lots of political damage.
Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, thanks so much for that. I'm delighted now to be joined by the Conservative MP for Bassetlaw, Brendan Clark-Smith. Brendan, good to see you. The police have this morning confirmed that they will investigate the Downing Street parties. Your reaction to that news?
Yeah, it's one of those things, Gloria, really. I think a lot of us really just want to be able to get on with it. We're waiting for the Sue Gray report to come out, and it's obviously important that we know the full story and exactly what's going on before we can make a decision on that. And this is clearly going to delay that. Police before have obviously said that they don't normally look into things retrospectively. I know there's a public interest element there, so they'll have that now. So it's very difficult to comment on it, I suppose, while that investigation's ongoing. But as you said, it's going to delay things probably by a few weeks. And in the meantime, you know, we've got Russia potentially invading Ukraine, energy, cost of living problems as well. And really, we just want to be able to get on with that.
Indeed, but the argument is that you can't get on the front foot. You can't get on with the business of governing. Brendan, you're always willing to come on when your party is having a rough ride. Respect to you for that. But come on, you can't go on like this.
Yeah, and I think that's why we wanted the report to be out. But at the same time, you don't want a half-hearted report that's just put through for the sake of it. People want some proper answers with things, and I think it's only right that it's done properly. Whether the police have needed to be involved or not, I couldn't say. I don't know exactly what it is that they're going to be investigating. I know it's mentioned Whitehall generally as well. But yeah, I was hoping that report was going to come out this week, and then we could, all things being well, draw a line under things and get on with it. But it looks like it's going to be quite a few weeks now.
Your Conservative colleague, David Davis, MP, who we all know has called for the Prime Minister to go. He tweeted, with the police now investigating, this nightmare gets even worse. We have to be able to get back to dealing with real threats as quickly as possible. He's making the point that you can't govern while this nightmare continues. What will it take for you to withdraw your support from the Prime Minister?
Well, I think we can govern, and we have been governing. If you look, the Prime Minister was on a call last night with different world leaders trying to deal with the problem that we've got coming up with Russia and Ukraine. We've been taking decisive action on many other things, so we're getting on with it. I think the perception really, as they say, never criticise the media, but a lot of the media, the opposition, maybe on Twitter, there's this obsession with this rather than things that are a bit more important. But we're getting on with the important things while this is going on. And whilst I agree, it is a distraction that we don't really want to see. I don't think the government is distracted from it. I would say it's mainly others.
Nadine Dorries, Cabinet Minister, has said, so when people in an office buy a cake in the middle of the afternoon for someone else they are working within the office and stop work for 10 minutes to sing happy birthday and then go back to their desk, this is now called a party, ? Do you think it's a party?
No, not at all. I think there's a danger of really overreaching, I think, a little bit. Someone having a birthday cake at their desk and while people are walking around maybe picking up a bit of cake, I think it's going a little bit far. I think I even saw one comment about, there's a decorator there and had a bit of cake. If my boiler breaks down and I get the plumber visiting, it's fairly customary that I'd make them a cup of tea while they're there. It doesn't mean that there's a party going on. So I think it's maybe getting a little bit silly. So I think certainly the birthday party one, it's not really adding anything. Sue Gray said she was already aware of that anyway. So I think that's been put out. I think, obviously, the police investigation that's been mentioned and the report being delayed is probably a bit more significant in that sense, because, as we said, we want to be able to get on with things. We don't want nitpicking. We want to look at things that are actually serious, and that's why it's important that the report's comprehensive and done properly.
You have a pretty whopping majority. You won the seat for the first time for the Conservatives at the last election. Your majority is sizable. But don't you feel that it might be different for your colleagues, those Conservative MPs with far, far smaller majorities? They must want this nightmare to stop. Is Boris Johnson really the man who can save their seats at the next election?
Well, I don't think it matters too much what your majority is, really. I think it's more a case that you shouldn't take your voters for granted, whatever the size of your majority. But, of course, a lot of us were elected in the first place because of Boris Johnson. I campaigned for the Prime Minister in his leadership campaign. We got an 80-seat majority. He's been very, very successful. Done a lot of other things. And I think really midterm, you're going to have a bit of a dip in the polls. But I think my message to people is basically, politics, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And don't pay too much attention to the opinion polls. Just keep doing the right thing and the polls will follow.
Brendan Clark-Smith, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, Gloria.
Well, the pandemic has taken a terrible toll on our health and made existing inequalities even worse. I'm talking to Labour MP Peter Dowd next about what needs to happen. Don't go away.
I'm Liam Halligan. Join me every weekday at 1 p.m. for On the Money, your daily dose of economics, business and consumer news. I got 25 years experience covering economics and finance. We hold grown-up discussions with a host of experts who really know their stuff. We can't buy gas and store it. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
I think it was a mistake.
Even you, Liam, don't have a crystal ball.
Inflation's a real threat.
Every weekday at 1, you're on the money.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Now we all know COVID has worsened. Waiting lists for treatment have made existing health inequalities worse than ever. Labour MP for Bootle, Peter Dowd, is leading a parliamentary debate on this tomorrow. I'm delighted he joins me in the studio. Peter, if I may ask you for your reaction to the police investigation into comings and goings at Number 10.
It's almost inevitable that the police were going to be brought in at some time, and seems to be today is the day that it's happened. It literally was, I think, a matter of time.
Keir Starmer, of course, he had a beer in his office during lockdown. Why is that any different?
Well, I think that, number one, I understand Keir's position was that they were in a working environment, they'd been out campaigning, they came back, they had something to eat, they hadn't eaten all day or much of the day, and it was a working event. But I think it's so different in degree as to be different in kind. I think I think that's the context with this. This is now one after another, serial, time after time after time.
Is there a bit of you that thinks that hopes Boris Johnson does remain as Prime Minister because you currently have a poll lead as a result of the negative stories that have surrounded the Prime Minister of late?
Well, I think ever the way you think these things through, one day you think, oh, it'd be a good idea, the next day it wouldn't be. This is so fast moving, it's impossible to see where we might be in 2 or 3 months' time. So in practical terms, I think Boris Johnson will most probably go before the next general election. Whether I think he shouldn't or would like him not to is irrelevant.
Let's talk about the parliamentary debate that you will be leading. Gap in health life expectancy between the richest and poorest areas. It's always been bad, whoever's in government.
Well, I think it's the extent and the chronicity of it. We're now in a situation where the United States and the UK, their health inequalities are worse than they were before 2010. What we've had for decades is those disparities getting better. They're now going backwards. And I think the disparities are not just in relation to rich and poor, but it's about region, towns, cities, the rural areas, men, women, gender, the whole area, types of illness that you might have. You know, almost part of a city or a town that you might live in, it throws up disparities as well.
The government say they're getting tough on this. They say, you know, this isn't a priority for them. They've set up this Office for Health Improvement and Disparities. They launched that in October last year, specifically to look at these things. So, you know, they're getting on with it.
Well, yes, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating in that sort of sense, is that you can set up as many task forces and organisations and departments and interdepartmental this and interdepartmental that, and so as many officers of this, that or the other. It's what you back them up with. What do you practically do? And that's what I'm trying to tease out from the Minister tomorrow with a series of questions. What are the government intending to do? How are they practically going to implement this policy to reduce disparities and inequalities? And do they know the extent of the disparities and the inequalities? Do they actually recognise that? Because before you do something, you have to get the measure of it and you have to recognise there is a problem. So setting up a department is fine, or an office is fine, but do you recognise the depth and the breadth of the problems we face?
What do you think they should do?
Well, I think what they've got to do is that they've got to some extent, do they acknowledge the depth of the disparities and the health inequalities? Do they accept that? Are they, for example, going to devolve some of these responsibilities to local government, who in the place, it's an important place, and where you live is an important element. So are they going to devolve some of these responsibilities to tackle these inequalities there? That's an example. Are they going to recognise that there are certain areas, for example, that are really desperately under the cosh in terms of health, in terms of the number of people and the staff vacancies, etc. So are they going to tackle those particular issues? Are they going to recognise that there are disparities in particular areas like rare conditions? The amount of disparity in rare health conditions is enormous. Are they going to recognise those issues?
Give us some examples.
Well, if you have a particular problem in terms of, say, genetic malformation, your access to a service might be significantly less than in another area, so to speak, in another discipline. So it's a question of whether we've got expertise in these areas to actually make sure that my access, if I have X illness, it gets the same level of attention as somebody else's illness, for example. But it's also about work. It's what the work that people do as well is important. You know, what type of job someone does, recognising that somebody who has manual work is going to have a much more likelihood of being injured, for the sake of argument, or their lifespan being significantly less. Therefore, what support you give them potentially financially later on when they do become ill as a result of the work they did, that type of thing the government has to look into as well and consider.
And have there been any particular figures when you've been doing your research, or particular inequalities, briefly if you would, that have really shocked us and that should make us sit up and maybe perhaps think that in some areas of the country we are going backwards?
Well, for example, in my area, there are about 18% of people who've been affected, people who work have been affected significantly by the work they did and the impact that has on their life, compared to other areas. For example, in Rochford and Essex, there's about 8% of people affected. So there are massive disparities in that regard. And
that's about what kind of work people do. Yes. That's really interesting. Hope to talk to you again. Thank you for coming in today.
Thanks
Peter Dowd, Labour MP for Bootle. Thank you very much. Now, Tourette's syndrome affects the life quality of over 300,000 people in the UK and an estimated 1 in 100 children, most of whom aren't diagnosed. It's misunderstood by the wider public and even health professionals. Conor McGinn is the Labour MP for St Helens North, and he's just had a parliamentary debate this morning on Tourette's syndrome, and he joins us now. Conor, good to see you on the show. Forgive me if I start by asking for your reaction to the police investigation into the Downing Street and Whitehall parties.
Nice to be with you, Gloria. Look, I think this is a serious moment for the country. It's hard, inevitably, to be shocked by anything that happens in Boris Johnson's Downing Street, given the litany of revelations we've had about the breaches of COVID regulations, the Prime Minister himself entangling himself in a complicated mesh of excuses and then denials and then lies and now apologies. But I think for the police to investigate the conduct of this Prime Minister and his Downing Street is a very serious moment. Boris Johnson isn't fit to be the Prime Minister of this country as his Downing Street and his Conservative government lurch from crisis to crisis. They're not tackling the crisis facing GB News viewers and the country, which is the cost of living crisis. Every day he remains in office is a day further away from getting to grips with the big problems facing this country.
Well, of course, as a Labour MP, you would say that. But, we thank you for sharing your view on the programme. Let me put to you what his allies say. Nadine Dorries. So when people in an office buy a cake in the middle of the afternoon for someone else they're working with in the office and stop work for 10 minutes to sing happy birthday and then go back to their desk, this is now called a party, she asks. It's a fair point.
Well, in the context of today, it might be a reasonable point, but we were talking about the first and most restrictive lockdown that we had. Gloria, people who shared the same house, who were having to isolate because of COVID and vulnerable relatives who lived with them, couldn't celebrate a birthday together. Never mind kids like mine who missed out on their mates and granny and granddads and aunts and uncles. All of those sacrifices that people made. I mean, these distractions and diversionary tactics being used by the government can't deny the fact that we've had a systemic litany of breaches of the rules when the government, Boris Johnson's government, were telling people how they had to do, how they had to stick by and abide by the rules, which they did when these guys weren't. Your viewers can see a spoofer when they see one, and this guy is a spoofer.
OK. Let's talk about the parliamentary debate that you led this morning on Tourette syndrome. And I know that you're campaigning on this issue because of a constituency case. Tell us about your constituent and what she has gone through.
So this is one of the great privileges of being a member of Parliament, Gloria, as you will know, which is my constituent Emma McNally, a St Helens mum from Par in my constituency, contacted me about her son who was diagnosed with Tourette's aged 9. He was under the care of Alderhay Hospital in Liverpool. The consultant there was removed and he was left without care. I mean, it was a devastating blow for her and her family. And when she got in touch with me, I raised the issue with the Department of Health. She has become a tenacious campaigner. She set up a petition that got 71,000 signatures for a parliamentary debate. So we just hit the bar because you need 100,000. But the Speaker granted me a debate this morning. Over 30 of my colleagues have also been contacted by families who are affected by Tourette's in their own constituencies. And so we were able to bring about the debate today. And thanks to you, further raise the issue on the media this afternoon.
Now, there's lots of misconceptions about Tourette's, isn't there? How do you define it?
So look, Tourette's syndrome is characterised by those who have involuntary movements or tics. The biggest misconception, and so many colleagues in here and the public that I've spoken to have as well, is that it's defined by swearing or saying inappropriate things. Actually, 90% of those with Tourette's syndrome don't have that as a symptom. And so you can imagine the stigma that there is around Tourette's syndrome and the impact it has on those who have the condition and their lives and everything from education to work and in social settings. So part of what today was about was breaking down some of the barriers and what we need to do. And the Health Minister, Gillian Keegan, was very good in the debate, and I've been working very closely with her. There is no side to this. There are no party politics to this. We want to work together on it with the campaign. She has acknowledged that we need to do more to ensure we have research, early intervention, that we give people ongoing care. Part of the difficulty is, 10 years ago, we had 44 specialist consultants who looked into Tourette syndrome. Now, bear in mind, 300,000 people in the UK have Tourette syndrome, 1 in 100 school children. We now only have 17 consultants. I have none at all in the Northwest. So Emma McNally and her son now have to come to London. We need to fix that. We need to ensure people have the proper provision they need near to where they live.
And you said that the minister who you addressed this morning was helpful, that this is not a single party campaign. But do you get any sense that the specialists will be put in all parts of the country? Because, as you say, the fact that Emma has to travel to London from the Northwest to see a specialist is utterly ridiculous.
Completely. And look, the minister certainly responded sympathetically to what I said. I know her, and I trust and believe her when she says that she wants to get this right. She's agreed to look at the Northwest specifically around provision and how we might be able to reinstate some form of that. And she's also agreed to meet the families and the campaigners. That's all that I can ask for from her at this point. And we'll revisit it in 3 or 4 months and see what progress has been made. But we need to address this because the impact it's having on hundreds of thousands of people, the stigma that the Tourette syndrome still has, and the fact that the tenacious campaign of my constituent Emma McNally has elevated this to a national level means I'm confident that something will be done.
Yeah, Emma sounds like a remarkable woman. If I can just as we await Angela Rayner, your deputy leader's urgent question in the Commons, I wanted to ask you, return to the subject of the day, because one thing that we can't get as journalists is really a sense of the mood on the opposition benches. Now, of course, Tory MP is not going to confide in you, but you can sense it. You can sense it in the tea room. You can sense it when you're looking across the chamber. Can you give us a sense of what you are sensing from your vantage point?
Look, I mean, we're focused in the Labour Party and our members of Parliament on tackling the big issues facing the country, on the cost of living crisis, on energy bills, where we proposed a VAT cut that would save households £200. You look internationally at what's happening in the Ukraine and Russia. There's a statement today that Keir Starmer will be leading on. These are the big issues facing our country and facing the world. And of course, there is intrigue in Parliament. There is a sense that as these developments continue to get worse and worse for the Prime Minister, how long it will take for his cabinet colleagues and the Conservative members of Parliament to finally say he must resign, his position is untenable. I mean, we need to find out what the status of the Prime Minister is in terms of this police investigation. Is he suspected of committing an offence of breaking the law? I mean, how can you serve as the Prime Minister of this country when you're under potentially investigation for breaking the law? So, the mood for us is very much about getting on with and doing things. I think good, honourable Conservative colleagues, and there are many of them, by the way, they feel embarrassed and they feel ashamed, and I think they're probably wondering how they can bring this to an end for the good of the country, but I think also for the good of their party.
Could you argue that actually now that a police investigation has been launched, arguably it gives the Prime Minister and the government breathing space to get on with the job, because they can say, we cannot comment on this. There is an investigation underway. We will cooperate with that investigation. And actually, it can take the pressure off a bit and enable them to talk about some other things that you mentioned there. The Prime Minister, for example, addressing Parliament today on Ukraine. They are getting on with the job.
But look, there are so many facts already in the public domain. Like, we've heard of the 5 stages of grief. The Prime Minister seems to be going through the 10 stages of denial. First he said he didn't know anything about these parties. Then when it emerged that his staff had joked about them at a preparatory press conference, he said he was outraged by it. And then it turns out, he's been there all along. He's been at them. He's de facto hosted some of them. So all of these facts are in the public domain. I mean, he has apologised for that, but he hasn't taken any responsibility for it. I mean, it's his house. He's the Prime Minister. They're his staff. He's running out of excuses and he's running out of people to blame. He should resign. The idea that the Prime Minister is falling back on multiple inquiries into his and his party and his government's conduct, and now a police investigation. I mean, the idea that that somehow is a good thing for the government, I think just shows how far this has fallen and the depths that the government and Boris Johnson are now plumbing.
You should be careful what you wish for, some might say. That Boris Johnson keeping his job is actually quite beneficial for the Labour Party, and a new revived Conservative Party leader, well, that will put the strain back onto the Labour Party, that you are benefiting at the moment from a party in trouble, but that can all change quickly.
I don't buy that at all. I think this is bad for the country, and I think the cost of living crisis, increased food prices, energy prices, all of those things facing working people across this country need to be addressed and need to be dealt with. Boris Johnson certainly can't do it. Frankly, I don't think any of the contenders to replace him can do it. but they need to make their minds up. You know, they can't absent themselves from the responsibility to say what they think about this Prime Minister's conduct. Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, he's in hiding. Liz Truss has all of a sudden, you know, found her wings and is travelling all around the world. They have questions to answer to about this. Every day this man is in office is bad for the country, and he needs to go, and we're ready to step up when required.
Conor McGinn, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you. So we're going to take you live to the House of Commons as soon as that urgent parliamentary question begins. We're going now.
The investigation into Downing Street parties following the statement from the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police.
Michael Ellis. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, as the House will be aware, earlier today the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police confirmed that the Metropolitan Police Service will be investigating alleged breaches of COVID-19 regulations within government. This is a matter for the police, and the House will understand that I'm not in a position to comment on the nature or content of the police investigation. Mr. Speaker, I have previously made clear from this dispatch box that the government recognises, and I recognise, the public anxiety and indignation that it appears as though the people who have been setting the rules may not have been following the rules. And I would like to repeat that sentiment today. And this is why the Prime Minister asked for a Cabinet Office investigation to take place. The terms of reference for that investigation, led by the Second Permanent Secretary at the Cabinet Office and the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, Sue Gray, have been published and laid in the library of this House. Those terms made clear that, as with all internal investigations, Mr. Speaker, if during the course of the work any evidence emerges of behaviour that is potentially a criminal offence, the matter will be referred to the police and the Cabinet Office's work may be paused. Mr. Speaker, as the House would expect, there is ongoing contact between the Cabinet Office investigation and the Metropolitan Police Service. However, the Cabinet Office investigation will continue its work. I would urge the House to wait for the findings of that investigation and for the police to conclude their work. That is important to allow the work to take place unimpeded and to protect the rights of all involved. Mr. Speaker, I must emphasise that matters relating to adherence of the law are properly a matter for the police to investigate, and the Cabinet Office will liaise with them as appropriate. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that the findings of the investigation will be provided to this Honourable House and made public. Mr. Speaker, the House will understand that there is a limit to what I can say, given this is an ongoing investigation. I also cannot comment on what is now an ongoing police investigation, and therefore I ask that members of the House let the investigation run its course and do not preempt its conclusions. Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for granting this urgent question. And well, all too soon, the Minister and I find ourselves here once again, rather than dealing with the cost of living crisis impacting on families, we're talking about scandals in Downing Street again. And the members opposite can chunter from their positions, but they're allowing this to happen, Mr. Speaker. 2 months now, Cabinet Ministers have been working hard to make Sue Gray the most famous woman in Britain. In response to every question asked about the poor conduct, bad behaviour and rule-breaking culture that this government has overseen, the ministers have repeatedly told us Sue Gray is the answer. Now there's a police investigation, and the terms of reference for Sue Gray set by the Prime Minister himself are clear. If any evidence emerges of behaviour that is potentially a criminal offence, the matter will be referred to the police. So it seems, Mr. Speaker, potential criminality has been found in Downing Street. What a truly damning reflection on our nation's very highest office. So I ask the Minister, Given this morning's announcement, when will the Sue Gray report finally be published? Can he assure the House that the Sue Gray report will be published in full, not just the summary, and will the accompanying evidence be provided? And can he clarify for the House what Sue Gray and her team will be doing whilst the police conduct their investigation? Can the Minister confirm whether the decision to delay the publication of the Sue Gray report was made by the Metropolitan Police or the Government? Given this Government's record, Mr Speaker, on lost phones, missing messages and minutes, can he assure the House that all evidence from the Gray inquiry will be properly held by the Cabinet Office? Can he clarify if the Chancellor, as a resident of Downing Street, is cooperating fully with the Gray inquiry and if the police investigation, and has he been interviewed? Just weeks ago, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister told this House there was no party. How does the Paymaster General explain that? I know across the country people know enough. They have made up their minds about the Prime Minister, so when will his party catch up?
Well, Mr Speaker, I will agree with her first point. Her first point was, why aren't we talking about cost of living? Well, the Prime Minister right now is working on cost of living. He's working on Russia-Ukraine. He is doing those jobs, and the Prime Minister is focused on those areas. Mr Speaker, I think she also, in her second point, forgets that the word potentially was used. The reality of the matter is that the fact that the police are investigating the matter does not draw any conclusions. If she looks at the statement issued by the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Cressida Dick, she has said that, stressed the fact that the Met is investigating does not mean that it will necessarily result in fixed penalty notices in every instance and to every person involved. So potentially is a key and operative word, and she wants to jump to conclusions, but she asks about the details of the investigation. Those are, of course, matters for the Cabinet Office and matters for the police. They're not details of which I would be informed. I wouldn't expect to be informed because the police have independent operational assessment of matters that are before them, and they will conduct the matter as they see fit.
Sir Edward Lee. When Europe stands on the brink of war and there is a cost of living crisis, can we please have a sense of proportion over the Prime Minister being given a piece of cake in his own office by his own staff?
I completely agree.
Mr Speaker, on Burns Day, it's probably appropriate we should start with the line, "The best laid plans o' mice and men gang after gley." Or perhaps a line from the other great Scottish writer, Sir Walter Scott, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practise to deceive." I do wonder, Mr Speaker, now that the police are finally involved, how much more personal humiliation and indignity will the Prime Minister be prepared to endure? But perhaps more importantly, how much more of this embarrassing circus are his colleagues prepared to tolerate before they act to remove this man from office? Because this isn't going to go away. This wound is not going to heal miraculously by itself, and I'm sure we all know there's an awful lot more still to come out. So can I ask the Minister, at any time, has anyone from the Sue Gray inquiry contacted the Metropolitan Police? When did the Cabinet Office first learn of this police investigation? When does he now expect the Sue Gray report to be delivered? And finally, can he assure this House that when it is delivered, that it will be delivered in full, will be open and will be completely transparent for every member of this House to access?
Well, he asks me questions about the police investigation, and I have no knowledge about that, and nor would I expect or should I have knowledge about it. And he asks about the publication, and I have already indicated that the findings of the investigation will be published.
Carper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Paymaster General, I accept he may not be able to answer this question now, but can he assure the House that he will keep, either he or other ministers will keep the House posted about whether the Prime Minister is going to be interviewed by the Metropolitan Police, either as a witness or as a potential suspect in this criminal investigation?
Well, I thank him for his question, but of course the police will conduct the investigation, as they do in any case, entirely at their own discretion, and I would not expect to be informed about that, nor would the House expect me to be.
Maria Riedel.
Mr. Speaker, there have been newspaper reports of Downing Street staff being told to delete evidence of parties from their phones, and staff fearing to give evidence to the Sue Gray inquiry for fear that the PM will see it and there'll later be recrimination. So now that there's a police investigation, will the Paymaster General make it clear throughout Whitehall that all evidence must be given to the police, and will he undertake to publish the report and evidence so that we can all see at the end of this affair that it has been done?
Well, I think one can draw a conclusion, if I may say so, from the fact that the Cabinet Office, in their liaison with the Metropolitan Police, have, according to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, satisfied her that an investigation should take place, and that should give comfort to those who might otherwise doubt the investigation, that it is a proper and due process investigation. And as in all cases where due process should be followed in the interests of fairness, it would not be appropriate to presuppose any result of a police investigation, or for that matter, of an independent Cabinet Office investigation. And as I've already said, I would expect the findings to be published in due course.
Shelley's father.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that it is a long-standing convention in this House that when there are independent inquiries and investigations, they are allowed to run their course and prejudgments aren't made in this House? Yeah. Given that is the case, and it would be advisable that that convention be carried on, would my right honourable friend also agree with me that we really do need to concentrate on matters that really affect our constituents on a day-to-day basis? Cost of living, energy prices and so on, as well as the fact that there are 100,000 Russian troops on the Ukrainian border, which threatens global instability.
He makes a powerful point about the pressing international situation, particularly as regards Ukraine and Russia. And I know the Prime Minister is focused on that matter. I also understand the anxiety and indignation of many who are frustrated by the reports that have been emanating over a course of many weeks about alleged gatherings in the Downing Street area. The reality of the matter is the Prime Minister is focused, as he has been focused, on delivering for this country, as he's succeeded in delivering vaccines, as he's succeeded in delivering on the manifesto commitments, and he'll continue that laser focus.
David.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear this government is now in total meltdown. Story after story about COVID laws being broken in number 10. Revelations about honourable members having constituency funding threatened by government whips, and now a Prime Minister and his staff under police investigation. In the midst of a pandemic and a cost of living crisis, and with Europe on the brink of war in Ukraine, we cannot go on with this chaotic government. No. Does the Minister accept that the Prime Minister's authority is in tatters? Will he advise his boss to do the right thing in the national interest and resign?
Minister.
Well, I thank him for his advice on propriety, but he will forgive me. He will forgive me if I decline to follow it.
Theresa Villiers.
Mr. Speaker, will the Minister agree that anyone taking a view on the Prime Minister must take into account the fact that he's presided over the most successful vaccination programme in the world, which is taking us out of this pandemic ahead of most other countries in the world?
She's absolutely right. And we would be in lockdown now were it not for this Prime Minister.
Partying anyway.
not starting. Ben Bradshaw.
Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister not simply compounding his previous terrible mistakes by continuing to deny culpability, leading to an unnecessary and expensive police inquiry when he could do the decent thing and resign?
Minister.
I'm sure he would expect fairness to apply to all in this country, whether it be one of his constituents or one of mine. And I would hope and expect that he would not wish to see unfairness to anyone. What we are doing is we are cooperating at the Cabinet Office with a police investigation. That will carry on and take its natural course.
Leave Parliament there and talk to our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White. I mean, the government, in a sense, you could argue that they've been bought time because they can say, there's a police investigation now underway, we can't comment.
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. I suppose it takes the immediate sting out of what we were expecting this week with the Sue Gray report, which is now on hold in a stacked position until that Metropolitan Police investigation is concluded. But the other way of looking at it, of course, is this whole issue just continues to go on and on and on, just taking little nibbles at Boris Johnson with every day that passes. As far as that investigation is concerned, well, we know that there was some 19, I think, at last count, events that were taking place in Downing Street and Whitehall in those 2 years that have been highlighted that we know of. The Metropolitan Police have said that some of those they have been able to ascertain do not meet the threshold for a formal investigation, but clearly others do. Now, in terms of gathering the evidence, we're not gathering evidence to put before a jury in a long, not expedited, but protracted trial, which obviously requires a lot of investigative process. We're talking about a process that would, at the end of the day, issue fixed penalty notices. So that's going to be quite a bit quicker. Having said that, we're not quite sure how many parties we're talking, even if it's half a dozen or so. It could take a bit of a time, even though Sue Gray has been able to gather a lot of the evidence that the Met will rely on, it could still take, I suspect, weeks, hopefully not months, but weeks certainly, before we get a conclusion and we know who is going to be the subject of a criminal sanction. I think it was interesting in the Met statement, and it was highlighted there by the Minister, which is that the Met have said that just because, of course, there is an investigation underway, it doesn't mean that everybody involved in any of these events are going to receive fixed penalty notices. So we may be looking at a situation, actually, if they deem that 1 or 2 or 3 of these events were in breach of COVID rules, that actually it's only the organisers. That would be, I think, in line with what we've seen before. If we maybe equate that to the kind of the parties and the raves that took place during lockdown and people that were issued with fixed penalty notices, they tended to be the organisers. So it may be that Boris Johnson doesn't get a fine at the end of the day, and it's those people that sent out the invites.
And briefly, we know that after this urgent question is finished, the Prime Minister will be on his feet to make a statement about Ukraine. We've got about 40 seconds left, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, clearly another very important issue that the government would rather be concentrating on. We know that the Foreign Secretary is going to be heading out to Ukraine next week as the diplomatic efforts continue, along with the threats, very overt threats to Russia that there are some very severe sanctions awaiting any move by them to go towards any kind of military involvement in Ukraine. But it remains very, very tense between Ukraine and Russia at the moment.
Mark White, thank you. As ever, you've got a busy afternoon coming up. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. The show is back every weekday from noon. Up next, it's On the Money, and of course, Liam Halligan will take you to Parliament for that Prime Minister's statement. But for now, it is time for your weather.
Hi there. There will be some brighter spells around today for some.
but for most it's cloudy and there will be outbreaks of rain in the far north of Scotland. That's associated with these weather fronts, which are just brushing the far north through the rest of today. And for the rest of the UK, well, we're still dominated by this large area of high pressure, keeping things dry generally and settled, but still rather cloudy. A lot of low cloud covering the hills of Wales, Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and bringing mostly grey conditions, but a few brighter spells poking through for North East England, perhaps parts of East Wales, Eastern Scotland and Northern Ireland. It's going to feel cold under the cloud in the south, 3 to 5 Celsius, a bit milder further north, but across northern Scotland we do have some rain, especially for the Northern Isles, where it will also be windy as we end the day. Coastal gales for Shetland, pushing through some showers overnight, but elsewhere across the UK, most places are dry. Again, a lot of cloud cover, but some breaks in the cloud coming south into northern England, the Midlands and Wales. And where we see some breaks, a touch of frost and a few fog patches are possible, but they'll be fairly localised because for the vast majority it's another cloudy start to the day on Wednesday. And that cloud persisting across southern parts of the country through much of the day, but some holes developing more widely across East Wales, the Midlands, as well as into parts of northern England. Meanwhile, much of northern and western Scotland sees it turn wet and windy by the end of the afternoon, although it will be milder here compared to recent days. And further south, it will also be a touch milder with temperatures returning to around average. Wet